The year was 1891. Dr. Lawrence Achilles Ed Connor had discovered his wife Julia Smythe was having an affair with his employer Herman Webster Mudgett, more commonly recognized as H.H. Holt. Connor, quitting his job and moving away, left Smythe and their 5-year-old daughter Pearl Connor to their fate in the hands of America's first killer. Trapped inside the murder mansion, a building synonymous with grotesque and gruesome cruelty, the odd thing is, the disappearance of Julia and Pearl on Christmas Eve 1891 was confirmed, but Holmes never confessed to taking the lives of Smythe. He simply said Smythe passed away due to childbirth complications. As for the crimes he did admit, I'll review later in more gruesome detail. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back, everyone. Today, as we peel back the layers of Holmes' existence, we encounter a man consumed by an insatiable thirst for power and control. His criminal activities, ranging from insurance fraud to suspected murders, paint a vivid portrait of his malevolent psyche. The investigation and subsequent trial that followed Holmes' capture unveiled the harrowing extent of his crimes, sending shockwaves through the nation and cementing his status as one of history's most notorious villains. Yet, Holmes' stories does not end with the execution in 1896. His legacy reverberates through the corridors of pop culture, inspiring countless retellings in literature, film, and beyond. From the pages of chilling novels to the silver screen, Holmes' tales continues to captivate and horrify audiences, serving as a grim reminder of humanity's capacity for evil. Herman Webster Mudgett, known as H.H. Holmes, was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire in 1861. He was raised in a devout Methodist household. You can see the downhill from there. Displays marketable intelligence but faced bullying and cruelty from peers and family. As a kid, he was made to touch an actual skeleton by his bullies. He began his education at Philip Exeter Academy, graduated at the age of 16, and later attended the University of Vermont. Holmes' murder castle was very interesting. Upon examination, they found many rooms featured different torture techniques, such as asphyxiation chambers where his victims were suffocated with gas. Iron plates prevented the guests from being able to beat their way out of the rooms of the hotel and kept the noise at a minimum. Blowtorch. Gas-driven fire blowtorches were fixed into the walls in order to burn and torture the victims to death. Dissecting tables, used to slowly remove body parts while the victim was still alive or dead. Quite gruesome stuff. Through the connections he had gained in medical school, he sold skeletons and organs with little difficulty. Crematory, used to burn and char bodies while alive or dead. Acid vats. Bodies could be conveniently disposed of by dissolving the flesh into the acid. On top of that, another sure way to make sure that his victims don't escape, Holmes added an alarm to all the rooms that buzzed into his office in case an attempt was made. Holmes' castle, located just to the left of the Eaglewood Post Office building on the corner on August 11, 1895, Joseph Pulitzer's The World's published a fictional floor plan of Holmes' murder castle with a vault, a crematorium, a trapdoor in the floor, and a quicklime grave for bones. Holmes moved to Chicago in August 1886, which is when he began using the pseudonym H.H. Holmes. Soon after his arrival, he came across a drugstore at the northwest corner of South Wallace Avenue and West 63rd Street in the Englewood section of Chicago. The drugstore's owner, Elizabeth Holden, gave him a job. He proved to be a hardworking employee, eventually buying the store. Contrary to several accounts, Holmes did not take the life of Dr. E.S. Holton. He purchased an empty lot across the street where construction began in 1887 for a 2-story mixed-use building with apartments on the second floor and retail spaces, including a new drugstore on the first. When Holmes declined to pay the architects or the steel company, Aetna Iron and Steel, they took him to court in 1888. In 1892, he added a 3rd floor, telling investors and suppliers he intended to use it as a hotel during the upcoming World Columbian Exposition. Contemporary accounts report that Holmes built the hotel to lure tourists visiting the exposition in order to end their lives and sell their skeletons to nearby medical schools. Although he did have a history of selling stolen cadavers to medical schools, Holmes had acquired these wares through grave robbings rather than murder. Likewise, there is no evidence that Holmes ever murdered exposition goers on the premises. The yellow press labeled the building as Holmes' murder castle, claiming the structure contained secret torture chambers, trapdoors, gas chambers, and crematoriums. None of these claims were true. Other accounts stated that the hotel was made up of over 100 rooms and laid out like a maze, with doors opening into brick walls, windowless rooms, and dead-end staircases. In reality, the 3rd floor hotel was moderately sized, largely unremarkable and uncompleted due to Holmes' disputes with the builders. It did contain some hidden rooms, but they were used for hiding furniture Holmes bought on credit and did not intend to pay for. Holmes did not kill an alleged castle victim. Miss Kate Durkee, who turned out to be very much alive, in his confession, Holmes stated that his usual method of killing was to suffocate his victims using various means, including an overdose of chloroform, overexposure to lighting gas fumes, and trapping them in an airless vault. Holmes also claimed to have used starvation and to have burnt victims alive in his castle. Holmes' hotel was gutted by a fire started by an unknown arsonist shortly after his arrest, but was largely rebuilt and used as a post office until 1938. Besides his infamous murder castle, Holmes also owned a one-story factory which he claimed was used for glass bending. Its central layer of the factory furnace was ever used for this purpose. It was speculated to have been used to destroy incriminating evidence of Holmes' crimes. The April 12, 1896 edition of New York Journal showing that the exterior and interior of Holmes' castle, this trunk was the one he used to murder the Petizzo sisters. A newspaper account of Holmes' confession including hand-drawn illustrations of the judge at his trial and 10 of his suspected victims. This next part are stories of his presumed murders. Holmes' mistress, a 31-year-old Julia Smythe, was the wife of Dr. Lawrence Achilles Ned Connor, who had moved into Holmes' building and began working at his pharmacy's jewelry counter. After Connor found out about Smythe's affair with Holmes, he quit his job and moved away, leaving Smythe and their 5-year-old daughter Pearl Connor behind. Smythe gained custody of Pearl and remained at the hotel, continuing her relationship with Holmes. Julia and Pearl both disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1891. Holmes initially claimed to acquaintances that Julia had left unexpectedly to visit her dying sister, but then changed his story and said that she had fled her former husband. Ultimately, Holmes later claimed that Julia had actually died during an abortion. Despite his medical background, Holmes was unlikely to be experienced in carrying out abortions, and mortality from such procedure was high at the time. Holmes then claimed to have poisoned Pearl, likely to hide the circumstances of her mother's death. A partial skeleton, possibly of a child around Pearl's age, was found when excavating Holmes' cellar. Pearl's father was a key witness at Holmes' trial in Chicago. 23-year-old Emmeline Segran began working in Holmes' building in May 1892 and worked for him for 6 months. Holmes reportedly hired Segran as a secretary due to her connection to a doctor who peddled a, quote, vaccine that allegedly cured alcoholism. Those who saw Segran in the weeks before her disappearance noted that she appeared to have lost interest in Holmes and their relationship. Segran was last seen in December 1892. Her parents were informed that she had left to marry a man named Robert Phelps. Authorities hypothesized that she had gotten pregnant by Holmes, possibly being a victim of another failed abortion that Holmes tried to cover up. Her empty luggage trunk was sent back to her mother in Anderson, Indiana. Her skeleton was found by police at the home of a Chicago physician with the help of M.G. Chappell, who admitted to having articulated 3 skeletons for Holmes. In early 1893, a 24-year-old one-time actress named Wilhelmina Minnie Williams moved to Chicago. Holmes claimed to have met her in an employment office, though it is believed that he had actually met her in Boston several years earlier while he was then going by the alias Harry Gordon. Holmes offered her a job at the hotel as his personal stenographer, and she accepted. Holmes persuaded Williams to transfer the deed to her property in Fort Worth, Texas to a man named Alexander Bond, which was an alias of Holmes. In April 1893, Williams transferred the deed with Holmes serving as the notary. Holmes later signed the deed over to Petizzo, giving him the alias Benton T. Lyman. The following month, Holmes and Williams, presenting themselves as husband and wife, rented an apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park. Minnie's younger sister, 18-year-old Anna Nanny Williams, came to visit, and on July 5, 1893, she wrote to her aunt that she planned to accompany Brother Harry in Europe. Then as she signed off with the message, Brother Harry, aka Holmes, says you need never trouble any more about me, financially or otherwise. He and sister will see to me. I hope our hard days are over. Neither Minnie nor Nanny were ever seen alive again, and Holmes would subsequently use Minnie's name in future scams. This next part are Holmes' suspected murders. A 68-year-old creditor of Holmes named John Dubreuil died of apoplexy on April 17, 1891. In the Castle drugstore, Dubreuil collapsed and died shortly after Holmes poured a black liquid down his throat. According to a witness, foul play was not suspected. In 1895, it was determined that Dubreuil's life had been insured and that Holmes had profited from his death. In 1891, Emily Van Tassel disappeared after working at Holmes' drugstore. He spoke of her in his confession. In 1897, Tassel's name was cited in a list of suspected victims, and Tassel's mother believed she was a possible victim. Dr. Russler had an office in the castle and went missing in 1892. Holmes mentioned killing Rossler in his confession. Harry Walker of Greensburg, Indiana, went missing in November 1893. He was alleged to have insured his life to Holmes for $20,000. That's roughly $690,000 in today's purchasing power. Harry wrote to friends that he was working for Holmes in Chicago. Holmes and Petezel took George Thomas out to a Mississippi swamp on the Tombigbee River in June 1894, killed him, and disposed of the body. Holmes confessed to this murder to his second wife, Myrta Belknap. Belford Cole of Baltimore, Maryland, disappeared after receiving a telegram from Holmes to come to Chicago in July 1894. An additional possible victim was Lucy Burbank. Her bank book was found with human hair in a chimney flue at the castle in 1895. Allegedly, in his confession, Holmes claimed to have killed 2 persons in Lake County, Illinois, 1890s, which was confirmed years later when the remains of an unknown man and unknown woman were found on a farm in 1919, 23 years after his execution. This next part is the story of the Petezel killings, believed to be the reason why Holmes got caught. While working in a chemical building on Dearborn Street, Holmes met and became close friends with 38-year-old Benjamin Freelon Petezel, a carpenter with a criminal past who was exhibiting in the same building. A coal bin he had invented, Holmes used Petezel as his right-hand man for several crime schemes. A district attorney later described Petezel as Holmes's tool, his creature. With insurance companies pressing to prosecute him for arson, Holmes left Chicago in July 1894. He reappeared in Fort Worth, where he had inherited property from the Williams sisters, at the intersection of modern-day Commerce Street and 2nd Street. Here, he once again attempted to build an incomplete structure without paying his suppliers and contractors. I would hate this guy if I was his contractor. In July 1894, Holmes was arrested and briefly jailed for the time on the charge of selling mortgaged goods in St. Louis, Missouri. He was promptly bailed out, but while in jail he struck up a conversation with a convicted outlaw named Marion Hedgepeth, who was serving a 25-year sentence. Holmes had concocted a plan to swindle an insurance company out of $10,000 by making out a policy on himself and then faking his death. Holmes promised Hedgepeth a $500 commission in exchange for the name of a lawyer who could be trusted. Holmes was directed to a young St. Louis attorney named Jephthah Hull. Hull thought Holmes' schemes was brilliant and agreed to play a part. Nevertheless, Holmes' plan to fake his own death failed when the insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay. Holmes didn't press the claim. Instead, he concocted a similar plan with Petezel. Petezel agreed to fake his own death so that his wife could collect a $10,000 life insurance policy, which he was to split with Holmes and Hull. Kind of confusing. The scheme, which would take place in Philadelphia, called for Petezel to set himself as an inventor under the name B.F. Perry and then be killed and disfigured in a lab explosion. Holmes was to find an appropriate cadaver to play the role of Petezel. Instead, Holmes killed Petezel on September 4, 1894 by knocking him unconscious with chloroform and setting his body on fire with the use of benzene. It really be your own. In his confession, Holmes implied Petezel was still alive after he used the chloroform on him before he set him on fire. Forensic evidence presented at Holmes' later trial showed chloroform had been administered after Petezel's death, a fact of which the insurance company was unaware, presumably to stage a suicide to exonerate Holmes should he be charged with murder. Holmes collected the insurance payout on the basis of the genuine Petezel corpse. Holmes then went to manipulate Petezel's unsuspecting wife, Carrie Alice Canning, into allowing 3 of her 5 children to be placed into his custody. Terrible parenting on her part, really. The 3 children who were placed under Holmes' care were 13-year-old Alice Petezel, 9-year-old Nellie Petezel, and 7-year-old Howard Robert Petezel. Holmes and the 3 Petezel children traveled throughout the northeastern United States and into Canada. He simultaneously escorted Carrie along a parallel route, all the while using various aliases and lying to Carrie concerning her husband's death by claiming Petezel was hiding in London, as well as lying to her about the true whereabouts of her 3 missing children. In an even more audacious move, Holmes was staying at another hotel with his current wife, who was unaware of the whole affair. Holmes was later confessed to murdering Alice and Nellie on October 25, 1894, by forcing them into a large trunk and locking them inside. He drilled a hole in the lid of the trunk and connected it to a gas line to asphyxiate the girls. Holmes buried their nude bodies in the cellar of his rental house at 16th Street, Vincent Street in Toronto. Frank Gayer, who was the Philadelphia Police Department detective assigned to investigate Holmes and find the 3 missing children, In June 1894, Geyer began tracing Holmes' steps and found the decomposed bodies of the two Pittsville girls in the cellar of the Toronto home. Detective Geyer wrote, "The deeper we dug, the more horrible the odor became, and when we reached the depth of 3 feet, we discovered what appeared to be the bone of a forearm of a human being." In Toronto, Geyer discovered unsent letters written by the Pittsville children that Holmes had kept. This information led to further investigations of Holmes' Chicago property and ultimately led Geyer to Indianapolis, where Holmes had rented a home in the Irvington neighborhood. Holmes was reported to have visited a local pharmacy to purchase the drugs which he had used to kill Howard Pittsville on October 10, 1894, and a repair shop to sharpen the knives he used to chop up the body before he burned it. The boy's teeth and bones were discovered in the home's chimney. After an intense and thorough investigation, Holmes was brought to court where he would face charges including murders and disappearances. Holmes' trial caught the attention of America. Everyone and their grandma knew about the trial. Despite his attempts at manipulation and denial, the weight of evidence against Holmes was just overwhelming. Witnesses described Holmes' acts, portraying him as a man without conscience or remorse. Ultimately, Holmes was sentenced to death and was executed in 1896. Despite the fancy clothes and elegant manners, the Victorian era was quite a spooky time to live in, with all its ghost stories and murder mysteries. Despite his execution in 1896, Holmes' story lives on. Acclaimed authors such as Harold Schechter and Eric Larson have immortalized his story. Their works give us an understanding of Holmes' crimes and detail of the murder castle. "I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer. No more than a poet could help the inspiration to sing." If you would like to learn more about an in-depth story of H.H. Holmes and his deeds, take a look at the link in the description below. The book is free upon signing up for a free trial. Just use the link in the description. Join me next time as we delve further into the next shadowy figure that terrorized and roamed Auschwitz, a Nazi officer deemed the Angel of Death. Until then, stay safe and never forget the lessons of the past. Thanks for tuning in. This is Quandrix. Till next time.